So welcome everybody. We only have about a dozen people here so far, but that's fine. So welcome to our class, Unlock Freelancing, presented by the Montclair Orchestra. For those of you who don't know, the Montclair Orchestra is a teaching ensemble. All of the principal chairs are held by professionals in ensembles like the New York Philharmonic, the Met, New Jersey Symphony, American Symphony, St. Luke's Chamber Orchestra, Orpheus, and just top freelancers at large. And then the rest of the ensemble is filled by music students in New York and New Jersey. We put on concerts this way, and it's kind of an unprecedented way of playing concerts that you get to learn from your principals, but you're also being treated like a professional. So if you want to learn more about us, montclairorchestra.org. That's my spiel, so welcome. I am going to start off with reading the bios of our illustrious guests. So first we have Kiku Collins. Kiku established herself at the height of pops, jazz, and R&B. This former Jersey girl followed music on a journey out of her small town to the Interlochen Center for the Arts, and from there on to the biggest stages in the world. According to Jazz Journal International, Ms. Collins plays trumpet and flugelhorn like a 21st century Miles Davis. Collins has performed with Beyonce, Michael Bolton, Jill Scott, Nick Lowe, Gloria Gaynor, Train, et al. She performed on the Today Show, Oprah Winfrey, Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, at the White House for President Obama twice, The Rachel Ray Show, The View, the World Music Awards, the Black Girls Rock Awards on BET many times, Ellen DeGeneres, the Grammys, and many others, in addition to appearances at several international jazz festivals. Collins boasts 2 recordings as a leader to her credit. Innova Records said about her debut recording, "Here with me, that Kiku puts a flugelhorn to her lips and animals come to listen. It's so sweet." Collins has played leading roles in the off-Broadway productions Fire Island and Degeneracy with Three-Legged Dog. She's also appeared in commercials for Metro PCS, Marshalls, VH1, A&E Critics' Choice Awards 2016 with TJ Miller, and New York sports clubs. In 2012, Collins played the main character of Loretta while also playing trumpet in the orchestra for Paul Levine's production Big Maybelle, starring Tony Award winner Lillias White. Collins continues to keep a busy schedule as a performer and clinician for Getson and Edwards Musical Instruments, and spends much of her time creating new music in her recording studio. Legendary trumpeter Mike Back said of Ms. Collins, "Her phrasing, sound, and lyricism reminded me of great singers. For me, that is one of the best compliments that I could give to any trumpet player." Collins is a cancer and lymphedema patient and is actively involved with advocacy organizations related to cancer, lymphedema, craniofacial differences, and autism. Ms. Collins is also an ordained minister and is registered with NYC to officiate wedding ceremonies. Keep that in mind. Take a drink. That was long.
Woo, sorry about that.
Next, we have Bryan Hernandez-Luch. Peruvian-American violinist Bryan Hernandez-Luch has been described by the Desert News as strikingly imaginative. He is an artist to be reckoned with. Bryan began his violin studies at age 6, and at 15, he made his solo debut with the Utah Symphony Orchestra. As a soloist, Hernandez-Luch has performed with the symphony orchestras of Detroit, Cleveland, Atlanta, New Jersey, Nashville, Chautauqua, New World, Colorado, Princeton, Grand Rapids, Battle Creek, Prince George Philharmonic, and Canada's National Arts Centre Orchestra. Bryan has also frequented the stages as a guest artist for The Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon, Saturday Night Live, Fox and Friends, The Today Show, and is a frequent violinist for artists including James Blake, John Legend, Josh Groban, Bridges from Madison Square Garden, Aaron Sveit, sorry, I'm saying that wrong, Live from the Apple Room at Jazz at Lincoln Center, Hanson String Theory, Live with Orchestra at the Beacon Theater, Peter Cetera, Pete Townsend's Quadrophenia at the Metropolitan Opera House, Il Divo, Frank Sinatra Jr., John Pizzarelli Trio, Debbie Reynolds, Donny Osmond, Sarah Brightman, the Young People's Chorus of New York. As an avid chamber musician, Hernandez-Luch has toured extensively across Colombia, the United States, Germany, Russia, Japan, Poland, Korea, and South Africa. As a founding member of the Catalyst Quartet, Hernandez-Luch had the distinct privilege of performing with the Guarneri Quartet in Mendelssohn's String Octet, and a performance of Tchaikovsky's Souvenir de Provence in Carnegie Hall's Stern Auditorium. A frequent collaborator and guest concertmaster with the Orpheus Chamber Orchestra, Bryan is also a member of the New Jersey Symphony Orchestra. He appeared as the conductor and onstage violinist for Broadway's The Cherry Orchard, starring Diane Lane. His previous Broadway shows include the Radio City Christmas Spectacular, Miss Saigon, Fiddler on the Roof, Elf, Dr. Zhivago, My Fair Lady, and the current production of West Side Story, on hold due to COVID-19. Hernandez-Luch earned a master's degree from the Juilliard School and a Bachelor of Music from the University of Utah. His major teachers have included Joseph Lin, Igor Grutman, and Nell Gotkovsky. Bryan lives in New York City with his wife, concert pianist Desiree Brown of the Five Browns, and their two children, Poppy and Rowan. Thank you for being here, Bryan.
Thank you for having me.
And now I feel bad for shortening my bio to as short as possible. Anyway.
Last but not least is Sandy Hughes, a native of Portland, Oregon, became a member of the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra at the start of the 2012-2013 season. In addition to the LACO, Sandy is a member of the Pageant of the Masters Orchestra and of the studio recording roster for Hollywood Scoring. She spent 5 seasons performing regularly with the New York Philharmonic, including the 2013 European tour, its productions of Company and Sweeney Todd, both of which aired on PBS. Sandy has appeared with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, San Diego Symphony, Hollywood Chamber Orchestra, Colorado Symphony, and was previously a member of the Akron Symphony. A Fulbright Grant recipient and twice a fellow of both the Tanglewood and Aspen Summer Festivals, Sandy earned her Master of Music in Orchestral Performance from the Manhattan School of Music, a Bachelor of Arts in English Literature from the University of Hartford, and a Bachelor of Music from the Hart School of Music. Her major teachers include Robert Langevin, Cindy Myers, and John Lyon. Thank you for being here, Sandy. All right. Now that we know who everybody is, I'm going to start with a question for all 3 of you. Anybody can volunteer to go first. Our fellows are mostly our fellows all go to schools in New York and New Jersey. And many go to MSM and Juilliard, like the 3 of you. When you were in school, what did you think your career was going to be like? Let's start with Sandy.
You want to start with me? Yeah. Okay, well, I guess I had a pretty good idea that I shouldn't have a hard and fast idea early on, because I remember people asking me, well, what do you want to do? What's your dream job? And I would always say on stage playing music, because I knew it could go any of a number of different ways. So I didn't really necessarily have a particular job in mind, other than that I just wanted to play my flute with other people. And I think if you've seized on one particular thing that gets you out of bed in the morning and makes you want to practice and work really, really hard, that's great. But I also think it's really good to have an open mind about what's coming. I definitely dreamed specifically of winning a full-time orchestra seat, ideally in a top 5 orchestra. Came very, very close once, but you know, I'm actually really, really happy with how things turned out. I playing in a part-time orchestra that is of an extremely high level, and then being able to have the variety in other styles of music and different types of, you know, recording, performing all over in different groups with different people.
So Kiku, what was your major at MSM?
I was a classical performance major, which is the furthest thing from what I'm doing.
So what did you think you were going to do when you left school?
I mean, I just kind of assumed that I would always play classical music, because that was really all that I did. I started dabbling in jazz at Interlochen, and you know, I thought, well, this is fun, but this can't really be a job, right? Because this is too fun. But I mean, I've kind of gone in a completely other direction, you know, by way of pop and R&B and disco, lots of disco these days. And it's just mind-blowing. It's the furthest thing that I ever imagined. I don't even own classical horns anymore. I still do the gigs, and I warn everyone, like, I have really commercial stuff, but if you still want me, it's cool.
Yeah.
Totally different.
And what about you, Bryan?
Oh, this is such a it's actually a very interesting question for me to answer, because I have sort of very non-traditional and non-linear sort of background with my education. Um, I started off at university, and I ended up, at the time I served a full-time Mormon mission, for 2 years in the Philippines, which interrupted my conservatory career. I didn't play the violin for 2 years. Um, so I kind of bounced around from different learning institutions. Won the Sphinx competition, ended up having a ton of performing opportunities, and I took myself out of school to fulfill that. And then I ended up, getting my master's degree much later after working professionally for many years. And that's what brought us, to New York City and to Juilliard. So I feel like I've lived sort of many lifetimes sort of in and out of education in school and conservatory. So I guess I sort of answered your question, like, what did you see yourself doing coming out of school? I guess I sort of answered that, coming out of high school, junior high. I think the questions that we have to answer, we have to do that very early on in our lives. You're dedicating yourself to an art, a passion, and you kind of have an inkling that this is what you're going to do. At least I did when I was, probably 7 or 8 years old, and
But the way
it's
we see ourselves playing music and the way in which we imagine ourselves playing music, school, and then where our life takes us sometimes. It's non-linear, like you said. So I did something similar that I went back for my master's when I was like 30. So why did you go back for your master's after you'd already had a career? What brought you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know that I knew that I needed to be on the New York scene. That just always called me, and being from Salt Lake City, Utah, and yeah, it was a wonderful place to grow up, but it's not New York City. Very few places are, and it was a great place to sort of feel this relativity, to feel and have the level raised, and to be amongst peers and musicians and artists that you were not you were on par, and you're not afraid to look up to them and look to them for advice and an example. And it took sort of like being a big fish in a small pond out of that setting and into a very like inspiring and invigorating musical world and life. And that's sort of why I still love living in New York City. I mean, I have 2 children now, 7 and 8, and this is just what we do. We right. I mean, like we've all experienced like New York City, and this is just what you do, and it's a new new standard.
The degree wasn't the goal. The degree was a way to like get yourself into the city that you wanted to.
It was the best excuse I had, yes, to make that happen, to make that move. Yeah,
I feel that for sure.
So, all right, I'm gonna have you answer this one first. What was your first gig after you graduated from MSM?
Ooh, I mean, I started playing church gigs, from the time I was 10 or 11, I don't know. But that was out in Jersey, and how many trumpet players? It was just me and my brother in our area. So um, that's a hard question because I quit playing for 5 years.
Oh, okay, so you don't.
I got really jaded, and I just put it away, and I said, I'm not doing this because there's no place for someone who looks like me in the trumpet world. But then I was waiting tables, and a fellow waiter, he said, hey, aren't you a musician? I said, well, I used to be, not anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do now. I was doing a little modeling and acting and stuff. And he said, well, we're starting this funk band, and we really want a horn section. So
Nice.
I said, well, I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt to try. So I need a few weeks to try and get it together, and that's how I came back. So there's that.
So quick, right across the board, how long have you been we'll just say everybody's a freelancer. So how long have you been freelancing?
Let's see. I started in my first paying gig was in high school for church. But I think really it was college. There was one of the teachers of my students was a director of music at a big Catholic church. So I started playing flute for him there, and then little pit orchestras that popped up here and there. And I think when I really started actually making most of my money from freelancing was uh, right after I graduated from MSM. I ended up in the Akron Symphony the following season.
Yeah.
So, and then just it started rolling from there.
How many? What year was that? Do you remember how many years it's been?
2010 was when I graduated with my master's.
This
So.
is good, not to out everybody for their age. But, there's a thing that like when we see somebody's third act and then we judge that against our first act. No.
Fair. Okay, so before I found much work in LA, I have to say I've been in the orchestra now for 9 seasons. And I felt like just before the pandemic lockdown, things were really starting to go good. And they're not going good now.
Nope.
Okay. Anybody else want to say how long they've been doing this?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I think I started really freelancing in the middle of my first college career. I was probably 21, 22. And Salt Lake City still has a very robust movie score recording scene out there. And so I was fortunate enough to get looped in with one of our main contractors out there, dear friend of mine, Meredith Campbell. And things just sort of took off from there. They just sort of became, this is what you do. You're on the scene, you're part of the community, part of the professional circuit there. And yeah, that's sort of been the pattern ever since, wherever I've been.
All right. Nobody wants to say everything. I've been doing this for 6 years.
That was 22 years ago for me.
So I've been a freelancer for 6 years, and I always feel like I barely know anything, but I'm helping kids who are still in school, and then they're going to get better. So I'm just putting it in perspective for everybody watching that this is not your first act. This is not your first chapter of this. And so you have to do a lot of things because you've been investing in this process for a long time. So they're guilty when they're beginning in a new town and they don't get any gigs. Like, that's normal.
That's a really important thing, because if when I go to a school to do a master class, I mean, I don't know, people think I'm younger than I am, and they're like, well, how did you find so much success so fast? I'm like, it took forever, I mean, it took so long for me to get, onto a big stage. I was the oldest one in the first tour that I did, and, but yeah, I mean, there are a lot of dues to pay. There are a lot of dirty bars to play in. For and you have to pass the bucket and hope that you make enough for a train fare home. It's a long road, but it's worth it.
So one of the ways that I know about you as a fellow female brass player and a fan is that you've toured the world with huge stars. So tell us the story of how you first got to play with some of these huge stars.
So I had found my way into recording in New York. I've been in New York since college. That's the main reason I applied to school at Manhattan, because I wanted to be here, and I knew that from when I was a little kid. And so I had kind of worked my way into recording a lot of jingles and film scores and all that stuff. And I was actually mixing my first record, and a friend of mine called me. Maybe even I don't know if we were texting by then, but he said, so Beyonce is auditioning for a band and you need to be there. And I said, first of all, I'm too old for this. I'm definitely wrong for that gig, and I don't have the time. And he basically told me that he would cut me off as a friend if I didn't go. It's like, fine, I'll just go. And it was like 4 auditions, but by the 3rd audition, they had auditions all over the country, and by the time the third audition came around, there were no other trumpet players, and I was so confused. I was like, what is going on? Where did all those, like, you know, vibrant young players go? So that's how it started. That's how the madness started.
That's kind of awesome that there was actually
With Beyonce.
Yeah.
Nice start.
It was actually a terrifying start because I didn't dance. I was so used to being I'm in a studio now. Look, some things never change, right? I'm in my studio. But yeah, I was used to, you know, rolling into recording sessions, basically in my pajamas, like nobody's looking at me. And all of a sudden they're telling me to dance. I'm going, I don't dance. And I definitely don't dance while I'm playing this thing. It was that first week was a crash course, and me crying in my hotel room like, I can't do this. But I did it.
Funny side story is the first time that Kiku and I met, we were playing together, and it was a Persian pop group, just
Yes.
trumpet, trombone, and saxophone. And we danced when we played our instruments.
And I love doing it now. I can't stop. You should see me at church gigs. I have a really hard time containing myself.
You brass players have all the fun.
And all the pain.
Yeah.
A lot of the reason that I wanted you to do this is because you've broken into LA recently, right? There's lots of people who are like the big names, but that's not going to be as helpful to the next generation as somebody who did this in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
But you also were a successful New York freelancer. So want to tell us a little bit about your time in New York before you moved out to LA?
Okay. Well, I did my master's at the Manhattan School of Music, and then, like I said, graduated in 2010. And the first thing I did right out of school was I went and played in Germany for 2 months with the Schleswig-Holstein Orchestra and did a tour in Europe. And that was just really, really inspiring. And I came home and was practicing like crazy. The Akron Symphony had a second flute audition, and I went and took that. And got the job. So that was my first gig and kind of my foothold in the region. I mean, I have a deep personal relationship with I-80 because I drove from Manhattan to Ohio and Ohio to Manhattan and back and forth for a couple of years before getting the LACO job. And I feel like even though I was doing little jobs here and there all along because of school and, you know, meet this person and that person, and there's a gig here and there that you kind of pick up. When I really started getting stuff was because of the audition success. So the kind of word goes around, oh, well, this girl, Sandy, she won the LA Chamber Orchestra job. And so maybe you want to try her if you need somebody. Like once you get your toe in that door with that first audition, or that first regional orchestra, and then you have a little more audition success, I feel like that I've kind of built my way up that way. And it was after I had already gone to LA, but I feel like when the ball really started rolling in New York, it was first after I got the LACO job. Robert started hiring me more as a substitute at that point because I had like gone into the world and proven myself. And then after doing a couple of seasons, or I mean, a couple of months with the orchestra in LA, I went and took the New York Phil's second flute audition, was runner up for that position. And that was when I had clout on both coasts. So I was able to, you know, the word of mouth got a little better. And then I had kind of this cool thing that was happening, like, oh, Sandy's working in New York. People are talking about it in LA. And then people in LA in New York are knowing that I'm working out in LA. So it was kind of, I feel like that helped me almost. Like I wasn't maybe as busy as I appeared, but I was often gone from both places. So I think the time in New York worked out for me because I had a job in LA, and the time in LA got better for me because I had some audition success in New York. Does that make sense? And then I started just getting there were a couple of ensembles that recorded things in New York that I got to play because of the audition there. And most of the work that I did, honestly, was subbing for New York Phil or doing something with their teaching artists, or it was always related to people in New Yorkville. My Batera trio is, Satoshi Okamoto is a bass player in the New Yorkville, and he invited me to join his chamber group because of our relationship through the orchestra. So it snowballed from doing well in auditions in both cases. So I practice your excerpts, I guess. That's what I'm saying. Even if you're never going to end up playing them, like I so rarely play excerpts anymore. I show up on a sound stage to record and they plop the music down in front of me. I have never any idea what we're going to be doing. But the reason I got there was because of traditional auditions. Yeah.
So when I put this class together, I knew right away that I wanted Kiku and Sandy because I knew them already. But then I was like, okay, well, I have 2 female musicians. I need a string player, and it should probably be a man because it shouldn't just be all ladies up here. That just isn't fair. To friends, and Bryan, your name came up from a few different people, and I know we had played together before, but I'm way in the back of the orchestra, so we hadn't met. But that's how I wanted you to know that you're very well thought of.
Oh, thank you.
By brass players, even.
We can hang with the brass players every now and again. When we're let into that circle, no.
So looking at your resume, you play with some of the top orchestras in New York and New Jersey, in addition to all of this, the pop stuff and on television and Broadway. How do you think that you were able to get on so many lists?
I think dovetailing what Sandy just said, one of the things that really, I think helped me here in New York City specifically was winning the first audition I took with the Radio City Christmas Spectacular Orchestra, right? Remember that gig? And word travels very fast in these places, and I think I was I'd been subbing on a few Broadway shows at this point, and word spread very fast, and it was sort of like, oh, this is the new kid on the block. He just won this audition, like he's here to stay. And I think being committed to sort of like, I think it's pretty remarkable, Sandy, that you were able to kind of bounce your experience between New York and LA. I think New York City musicians really can appreciate if somebody is really laying down their roots in the city and they're committed to the scene. I've had colleagues or people reach out to me who are sort of asking, like, how do I get on the Broadway scene? How do I break in? And the question I usually respond with is sort of like, well, what's your intention and what are your long-term plans? Because this is not a short game. This is not like I'm looking to sub on a Broadway show for a summer so I can kill some time before I go, do this other thing. You'd be surprised that it's just a lot of people just don't understand what that commitment is like. And so one of the things that helped me was just winning jobs and being present for sort of long-term situations. And I think that people realize that when you're there to stay, then they're also willing to invest in you.
Can you tell us the story of how you got your first show? Because I know there's a big, people who don't know, there's a big difference between subbing on a show and being in the pit that is your show. So.
Yeah. Well, my son Rowan, who is now 7, he was the day he was born, April 22nd. I had a recording session set for April 23rd, which I kept. And I had my hospital band around my wrists, and I went to the recording session. Everything was fine with our pregnancy, fortunately. And I'm meeting a lot of these, freelancers for the first time, and one of my colleagues who I was sitting with, she noticed the hospital band and asked me what was happening. So, my son was just born yesterday. What are you doing here? Well, you need to earn some money too. I was invited from that recording session to go sub on Cinderella at the time. This is over at the Broadway Theater. Cinderella was a really great show to start subbing on because they had 4 violins in that pit. Not usually like the 1 or 2 that we're accustomed to. So I got the chance to meet a lot of different string players rotating through that one show. And I stayed very curious about everybody that came in. And I asked a lot of questions. I saw colleagues on the train and would ask them the questions that I'm being asked now, like, how do you get the next show? How do you, what's the deal with contractors? What about conductors? And I think I learned a lot in a short amount of time. And one thing leads to another, get asked to play another show. And so my first show that I was invited to be concertmaster of was Dr. Zhivago, the musical, which lasted for 2.5 weeks after opening.
Oops.
And that's Broadway for you. I've been very fortunate to have a nice string of shows ever since then. So yeah, in that sense, Kiku, I know you're talking about it takes a long time to get on these scenes. I feel very fortunate that happened very quickly for me after graduating from Juilliard and, getting my master's degree, because I know we have colleagues that have, we're there. Some of these friends of ours have been there 15, 20 years and are still hoping for, a show or two after all these years. It's a tough business.
Yeah.
So Kiku, I was going to ask about your time as an actress, but now that I heard you talk about that you took time off after school, it sort of changes my question. So you started doing the acting and modeling when you just sort of left school for a little bit, and was it always something that you were interested in? How did that get mixed into what you've done?
Everything was kind of by accident. Actually, the weird thing is that, as far as like acting and modeling, it was just something to help pay the bills, and nothing was really high level. I mean, there were a couple of commercials, but when I did my first off-Broadway play, the director actually was at a gig that I was playing at with this crazy like performance art band. And so this is the last time I used my piccolo trumpet, quite frankly. But so it was like this weird comedy thing that we did, and the band was incredible, but the singer was so hilarious and completely insane, and my job was to keep a completely straight face and not laugh at anything, and just, he's popping water balloons in his pants and stuff, and he's like kissing a rubber chicken. I'm just sitting there like, can we play the next tune? And so this director just happened, I guess, to catch our show. We played at like 1 a.m. at the living room, I think, or Baby Jupiter. I don't know. See, now I'm dating myself. But and so he came back again, and I don't know how many shows he came to, but he approached me finally one time, and he said, "Hey, so you're an actress?" And I said, "Not really." He said, "No, you are. I've been watching you. I wrote this play and I'm producing it, blah blah blah." I was like, "Yeah, cool for you. I don't do that." And he kind of would not let up until I agreed to audition, and I kind of read it for him, and he was like, "Great, you got the gig."
Just makes me think about, it's talking about paying the bills and stuff. We were talking about side hustles before the class really started, before we invited everybody in. And I was, for people who don't know this, they do a lot of filming of television in Atlanta. And so I signed up somewhere when that was the very first year that I ever freelanced, was when my husband and I got married, and I left my job in Colorado Symphony to be with him, and I signed up and I did some extra work.
Yes, extra work.
$12 an hour, and I spent most of the day sitting with my 3DS, like playing video games, and then I would go and pretend to be in high school and like walk. So there are a lot of funny things that musicians do as side hustles. So for all three of you, what are some of the more memorable, or maybe the more long-term day jobs, whatever you want to call it? I like side hustles because I don't take myself too seriously, but whatever you want to call it. Playing your instrument jobs.
This relates to that. This is the very most recent thing for me, in fact. So I can join the ranks of you cool kids here on this acting front, if you will. I got called by a casting agent sort of out of the blue. I'm still unsure how that connection was made. But, you know, when you're signing the non-disclosure agreement, you suddenly realize you're going to be filming a music video with Dua Lipa. And so 55 million views later, I'm one of 3 musicians aboard the Titanic in her latest video. This track is called Work Good. And it's all about this lobster, you know, aboard the Titanic who gets saved. And, you know, I don't think the musicians make it, but you know, I was technically hired. Yeah, I was technically hired on as an actor for this. And, you know, we get there's a violin, keyboard, and a bass. None of these instruments are in the track. And the director is like, we just want you to play along. Just look like you're jamming out to this, and we're arranging these parts what we can play. And, you know, you don't know how much they're going to incorporate your image into the video until the thing came out. And there's a fair amount of, you know, us in there. So that's kind of the most recent foray into that land that I've been able to make.
What was one of your longest standing non-instrument playing gigs, day jobs, whatever?
Okay, sorry, I'm muting so that the children noise is not too loud. Let's see, mine are not exciting. I feel like Kiko should go last, that'll be better. But I waited tables, and I didn't do it at a single restaurant. I worked for a catering service so that I could take work when I had time off, and I could not take work when I had gigs. I would highly recommend this to anyone, assuming things go back to normal. It was a great side hustle because it was very flexible. And then the other one I did that was long term was I worked in the orchestra library at MSM, and I numbered parts and I bowed parts and I bound parts, and I, you know, erased people's markings and got things clean back to zero. And now I'm like super anal about all of my music. And whenever people don't have a part that they need for an audition, I am getting texts and phone calls like, hey, do you have this? Because it's sort of like in my class and the classes ahead and behind me, everybody knows Sandy is like this hoarder of orchestra parts. So I have like all of the Shostakovich symphonies, and I have, you know, a lot of parts that are only available by rental, because every time they came across my desk, I'd be like, photocopy that and save this. And it actually, if you have a chance, even if you're not going to work in your orchestra library, if you are studying classical orchestral music, I would, you know, anytime anything comes across your stand that's going to be kind of rare, grab it and keep a copy. Don't sell it. That's wrong. But definitely have it for study. Have it for study.
And also, if it's like, there would be readings at Juilliard of different things. Like they did a reading of Miraculous Mandarin, right? So we had to rent the parts. I worked in the orchestra library too. We had to rent the parts, and they were there. And
yeah, I mean, why not?
I don't think I played in that reading, but I knew that the parts were there. So I copied and then scanned the whole low brass section so that I could have them if we ever needed them. If I ever wanted to play them, and like, because trombone low brass players play excerpts for fun.
Let's get our nerd flags out and wave them around. This is what we're doing. Okay.
Together as a group and play excerpts from orchestral pieces for fun.
Yes. You know what? My husband does like this trombone quartet every week, and he's a jazz player, but he's playing classical every week. I'm like, what is going on?
It's when most of what you do is playing chords, you have to like playing with other people.
Yeah.
Most of what we do is chords. We don't play melodies like y'all. Treble clef instruments. All right. So I'm going to get to some of the questions that people have asked of everybody. What would you tell yourself when you were still in school, if you could? And also all our participants, please throw questions in the chat or anything whenever you want.
I would have reminded myself, I would have told myself to take every opportunity that came my way. And I've learned so much, and I've been able to get so many more gigs from taking what seems like the lamest thing to do. And all you have to do is meet somebody on that gig who can speak well of you after that experience, and there's a connection. It's worth its weight in gold. So I would say, as a classical musician, right? Like this is, you have this cachet. You're like, oh well, no, this is what I'm set out to do. This is what I do. You know what? We're musicians first and foremost. We become artists later, but we're musicians, and we read and play music. I would have encouraged myself to have more fun with those gigs. Yeah, just
yeah, definitely have more fun. And I actually would have told myself that I'm not just a musician, that I'm training to be a performer. And I loved being anonymous, and I loved hiding in the section or being locked up in a studio. But I wish I had taken dance classes, because I dance so much now, and I was really old to start doing that stuff. So, I definitely would have loved to have done that as a young person. And I would have said, take dance classes, take singing lessons, because sometimes I sing backup. It's like, wow, it would be really cool if I had learned to do this in my teens and in my 20s, or whatever. So I would have said, you know what, imagine bigger things, imagine different things. Don't just be so set on this just because this is all you've really done.
Yes, I would have, someone did tell me this, but I wish I had heard it louder or understood it better at the time. So I'm going to try to adjust it a little, so that maybe it will hit college students in the right way. Tend the network that you have and grow it every chance that you get. And then I would say literally set aside time for a long time. I literally set aside an hour a day to tend my network, email people, call people, text people, check in. How are you doing? What's going on with your career? Don't just call when you need something, or you have a question, or you want to, don't call only when you need something. Be interested in your colleagues and what they're doing and how their life is. And this is very natural to me because I'm an extrovert and I enjoy interacting with people. But I know this is hard for some of you introverts, because I am married to an introvert. I've learned a great deal more about them. It is challenging. And I think there are a lot more introverts, especially in classical music, than there are in maybe some other forms, because we spend so much time alone in a practice room getting ready for our auditions and our competitions and our lessons, and you speak through your instrument because you're less comfortable speaking with your voice to other human beings in a social place. And I think I would just have encouraged myself to do even more of that sooner. Reach out to someone new, even when you're scared. Do it anyway. Send an email, say, I admire this about your playing. I really enjoyed this performance. Let them know, and just don't ask for anything. Just say, wow, that was great. I really loved it. When you go to a concert, go to the edge of the stage and be like, hey, that was awesome. Go to the stage door, say, I loved it. I was here, because you're not going to get any networking credit if they don't know that you showed up for them. And I think I went to a lot of stuff that people didn't know that I was there, and I was there admiring people's playing, and they didn't know that I admired it for many years before I kind of got brave enough to say something. So I just, the the networking thing, any way that you can possibly connect with other musicians, with contractors, with, like you're saying, dancers or actresses, or it just, if you're at Juilliard or MSM, there are other kinds of artists around you. Don't just hang out with your studio. Don't just hang out with people in your instrument family. Make sure that you're reaching out. And I remember the very first night at orientation at Tanglewood, Michael Knox said to all of us, look around the room. These are the people that you're going to work with for the rest of your career. So be nice. Be nice. And I thought, oh, what is he talking about? And now I understand, because these are people that have won jobs in orchestras all around the country. They're people that I freelance with here. They're people that I've worked with in New York. And it keep up those contacts. That's all I'm saying. Network tend, network tend, network tend.
We had a question come in that's very tied to this. What is your advice to people who aren't so socially savvy and who are bad at networking? It seems like you always need to know or talk to the right person. So it seems like those are two parts. So do you always need to talk to the right person, or is it enough to just keep meeting more people? That's the first question for everybody.
So I'm actually an introvert. That's why I loved recording so much. And that's why I was so terrified and in tears for my first big TV job. I don't belong here. But I mean, a piece of advice that I always give to students is to never be a jerk. Never be that one person that say, oh no, I can't believe they're here. This sucks, all right, well, we'll just try and avoid this person. Because I've seen people lose really epic gigs and it has nothing to do with their playing or their performing. Nothing. It's all about how they treat other people. And just remember that you're not that special. I'm not that special. I just, I don't know. For some reason, I've figured out what's needed on the gig. I enjoy what I do. I'm so grateful for every gig that I get. Even if I'm passing a bucket, I really don't care, because I love it. But it's so important to be kind to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to be that outgoing. People think I'm so outgoing. But and you also do have to learn to work on that skill. And it is a skill, just like anything else. Okay, great, so you know how to flutter tongue. Did you get that skill together where you can, coexist with people on the road? Because that's more important. So yeah, definitely, work on that and find something in everyone to appreciate and to enjoy. You don't have to like the people, but you have to get along and you have to work together, because music is a conversation.
I think the practice makes perfect thing. I always tell my students, it's practice makes permanent. So whatever you do all the time is what you do all the time. And so I think if you're not feeling it naturally, I mean, I'll just be really honest. My technique, just bass finger stuff, has always been a challenge for me. And I always felt like, even maybe this wasn't true, that I had to work harder at that than other players. It came to them naturally. So I would say that if you don't feel the natural social part, then it's something that you just need to work on. Make a goal for yourself for this week or for this month. I'm going to reach out to 2 or 3 people. I'm going to make sure that I talk to my 5 or 6 people that I already know, and just set aside time for it. Start with emails if you're too scared for voice-on-voice contact. I mean, it's the perfect time right now while we're all isolated. People actually, I think, really appreciate when you reach out to them right now in a non-invasive way, like email, and just, how are you doing? What's going on? I'm thinking of you. And that can go a long way. You'd be surprised.
Yeah, huge.
So here's another question that came in from other people beforehand, was how beneficial is it to be in touch with contractors, and how can you start relationships with contractors? we as musicians, we're going to be sitting next to musicians and hanging out in the green room with musicians. So that feels very natural to just meet more and more musicians. But the contractors are sort of, it seems like they're this mysterious entity, except for the one that you get hired from. So how do you meet the other ones? Can you?
I'd say that it's I'd say that it maybe shouldn't necessarily be the goal to meet the contractors or contact the contractors.
Yeah, same.
I think the goal is to go back to what Kiku was saying, and to just be a cool person. And if you're sort of like that, if you're easygoing enough without having an attitude about yourself, the word travels very fast. If people want to work with you, you'll end up getting recommended to contractors. That's how the connection's made. You're connecting to the people that the contractors are already working with.
Yes.
You don't know who you're working with. You have no idea, which is why it's super important on a break or on a lunch break or something, the in-between moments is where being social, is where chatting and not kind of just going off into the corner and doing your own thing and playing a gig. That's when it becomes really important. And you don't have to think about it as networking. You just have to just be open to conversation and just being, hey, what's your name? I'm new here. Like, I don't know what's going on. This is how you begin. I think too often, I'll just close this circle, is that I think too often we're like, how do we get the big fish? How do we reel that one in? Well, you've got to get along with all the school of fish first before you're invited in.
Ooh, I like that. I'm still taking that.
Perfect.
It's so true. It is.
Yep.
It really is. I still have no idea how I ended up getting to play on Family Guy. I don't know who recommended me. I don't know how the contractor got my information. And I showed up on the stage. I was the only woman on the back half of the whole stage. And there were all these guys who were, older than I am. And I remember at the first break, the sound engineer came back and was like, wow, you guys all your language is so clean today. What's the difference? And they were kind of joking that there was like this new different person in the middle. And I was like, oh man, I'm harshing the mellow, like everybody's not as chill. So then I kind of tried to like loosen up and make jokes and make people feel more comfortable around me. I sensed that perhaps I was making everyone feel uptight, and then it got easier and it felt better, and then I got asked back, and then I got to go again. And I think it is really important to pay attention to like the vibe around you and make sure that if you're harshing it, you can do something to try to but also, like, I still have no idea how I got there, and I'm so grateful for whoever said you should test her out. Like, I have a story I really want to tell before we leave, and I can tell it whenever, but I owe Nikki everything in LA.
Tell the story, or what is your story of how you broke into studio work in LA?
Well, I owe it to you 100%. My toe got in the door because of her. So I, of course, my name was kind of around because I had won the LA Chamber Orchestra job, and Susan Greenberg was in that chair for many decades. She's got the job, I think, around the time she was my age, and didn't retire until she was in her 60s. So it had not been open for a long time. And the same thing with Dave Shostak and Alan Vogel, principal oboe. They both just retired, and those chairs had been those two guys forever. So when it changed over, it was a big deal. So that was a huge part of it. Just having that kind of like social currency in the music scene. But Nikki told a trombone colleague of hers, who is also a really successful and growing contractor here in Hollywood, Noah Gladstone, hey, if you need a flute player, you should try out my friend Sandy. And I don't know when you said that to him. I feel like I was here for several years before
Colin and I went out to LA. My husband was on trial for principal trombone of the LA Philharmonic. I went with him because I'd never been to LA, and I was like, well, if
So you saw Noah then?
for us to live here, I want to visit and try it out. And so we went out for drinks and we're hanging out with him, and that's what.
Okay. Well, I don't know like what the timing was between when that drink happened and when I got called for something, but that was my very first session ever. And I had been here in the orchestra for probably a couple of years already and was like, how am I ever going to break in? I don't know how it's going to happen. And it wasn't happening. And I was waiting tables and feeling like terrified what's going to happen next and bouncing back and forth to New York. Um, and I got to play this first gig, and it was incidentally, I don't know if any of you guys know who Claire Brazeau is. She's principal oboe now in LA Chamber Orchestra, and we joined the orchestra right about the same time, and we ended up on the same gig, first recording session. Both of us are like, we have no idea what we're doing, and we're trying to look like we have it together. But that was the start, and I had a really good blend with the first flute player, Amy Tatum. It just felt like we were naturally meant to play together, and so that's also really important because you're not always going to be principal on every gig you play. So when you get in that second chair, you want to like be really tuned in to what's going on around you so you can fit in. But I love doing that. That's one of my favorite things to do. I think that's why I play second flute, is because I really love that job. But I
started about how being a freelancer means that you have to practice on spec. Say it in your own words, but
the speculative practicing. Well, I didn't know that gig was coming. I feel like I found out maybe the day or two before, like, hey, are you free for this? I think someone else must have been sick or got another job that they had to go do, or something came up, and that was how I got it. So I guess, yeah, we were talking about this before we started the class, that I said that as a young person, as a freelancer of any age, you have to sort of speculatively practice because you don't know exactly what's going to come, when the phone's going to ring. And I think what I was talking about before was that when I got to start doing a lot of work with the New York Philharmonic, it was because the couple of times oh no, something bad has happened last minute call came, I was warmed up on piccolo, even though I had no piccolo work coming up. I practiced the piccolo every day, almost every day, so that it was there for me in case I needed it. And I would say that's a good policy to have. Just even if you don't have work coming up, stay sharp. Don't take many weeks off of your instrument and then an opportunity comes knocking and you're out of shape. That would be.
You gotta say no or do a bad job, which is worse.
Oh, never take a gig that you don't feel like you can play well. You're only as good as your last gig as a freelancer. If you go and bomb something, I feel like that's not a good idea.
This is for everybody. How important do you think social media is for your career?
Do you guys want to do that one? I feel like I'm almost never on social media. I'm terrible about it.
Not important to Sandy's career.
I think it would help, but I just don't have time for it right now.
I think the main thing that my husband and I both find about, being on social media, is that it's not about, hey, look at us, we're musicians and we're so cool and you should hire us. It's more like, hey, we have interesting lives and we have children and we have these crazy cats and they're tearing up the foam in the studio. Isn't that hilarious? And look what we cooked today, and hey, we're hanging out with our friends and some of them are not musicians. And I think it's more about staying in someone's radar, staying in people's radars. Like, you do kind of forget about people. Especially, I travel the world, so I know a lot of people around the globe, and it's too many people to take inventory of every day. Like, gee, I wonder how all these people are doing around the world. Let's count them, So social media is really interesting because it does help people. I mean, at least I think for all of our gigs. So I think for all gigs, like we were saying, be the nice person, get to know people, and that is part of it. It's fascinating. You show up to a gig, oh hey, I just saw that blah 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 happened, and
You
and
have
so,
stuff to talk about of their life. Yeah.
but also people feel connected to you, even if you haven't seen them in a year. Like we
I know.
haven't seen each other in a year, so we know what we're doing.
I describe networking as fighting the out of sight, out of mind. You want to be front of sight, front of mind.
Yeah.
However it
But
takes.
not annoying. But not
No.
annoying.
You want to be remembering you when that instrument is, so you want to be front of sight, front of mind, not like this in their face.
Yeah.
Just like keep reminding them that you exist. And when we can't physically go to somebody's quartet recital or whatever, or solo recital, if you can't physically be there, but there's live streaming it,
Mm-hmm.
and technology is really useful.
Yeah.
I am on there every day. I like and comment and keep up with people, but I'm just so lazy about posting.
Oh, but like my Instagram is connected to my fan page on Facebook and Twitter. I don't even know how it works. Trust me, I have no clue. But somehow I'm figuring it out, and I'm putting little weird pictures of my cats, and oh, cute cat, blah blah, but
You have to try.
it does
Yeah.
work though. I mean, I
You have to
heard
have
from
it.
people. Yeah, I've heard from people like, hey, I saw that really cute picture of your one-eyed cat. By the way, I had this gig coming up, and I think they need another trumpet player. Are you available? Like, really? You got that from looking at Artie's picture? Cool.
Whatever works, right? Whatever gets you in the door.
It's crazy.
So I posted in the trombone professors group that I had the class in case people wanted whatever. Like this was early on in the pandemic, and a few people hired me, and then we posted about it, and then it snowballed because as other people were seeing, oh, these other schools are bringing her in, maybe I should bring her in. And then it was bigger things, and it's like the perception, and that's I'm learning that working with a social media consultant of like, how do you use this to change? So
yeah,
very helpful. So we also have a very spicy question. How do you deal with that sip some tea? Bringing the tea. How do you deal with conflicts / stand up for yourself without burning bridges? And I feel like this is going to lean in two ways. One is it's really directed at the ladies because I feel like we end up in those situations a lot. But also, I'd be curious, Bryan, how like you would react as part of the.
Well, I'd like to hear Bryan's answer first.
Yeah, I agree with what you, Nikki, with what you said. Certainly, that's not to say that that I've certainly had several experiences where I've had to sort of stand my own ground and draw some professional lines. Mostly about respect and being a good professional, being a good human, being a good colleague. And
without giving personal details or
yeah, I mean, it's situational. I mean, a lot of people who find themselves in positions of control or power tend to end up abusing that position, and that takes many different forms. Disrespect is one of the most common forms, and I find it very offensive as a professional and as a colleague and as a friend when somebody kind of going a little too forward into the experience and taking themselves too damn seriously. And I found myself sticking up for other colleagues. I found myself sticking up for myself, and making sure that those people who need to know are aware that I'm not going to necessarily adjust or back out of my space in fear of retaliation or fear of standing my ground. And I know that's sort of like a power play back and forth, but you have to draw the line somewhere. You have to support an equitable workplace for everybody. And I know some of the things are gender-based discrimination, harassment issues, racial bias. There's a whole plethora of areas now that I think it's good that we're all aware of them. Where we have training sessions, we have meetings, and how to report things, how to professionally address these issues. But just from the onset, most of the stuff that I've felt prompted to kind of hold my ground with is just being a good professional to each other. There's no reason to abuse people around you, and when that happens, it's important to say something to that person. And it may be, I've often kind of come away from those situations and be like, well, it's the last time I'm going to work with that person, and that's fine. Like, I'm fine.
Would you
with
say that is when you are feeling like you're equal with the person that you're having the conflict with? Because I feel like I have more experience with this power structure than I do with that one. And I'm just wondering how, like, I think it would be important to discuss this angle too. So, I mean, what are you talking about right now?
Yeah, well, I felt it from both ways. Certainly, it's a lot easier to address when you're feeling it like this. But this is where it's the most abusive construct right here.
Yeah.
And it's still important in those that, look, obviously, you don't want to wag the dog if there is a power structure. There's a conductor, there's a music director, there are contractors, a lot of people in place before you get to this top thing. But if you're treating people with respect, you must demand the same thing back. And I think regardless of where that is coming from, I know this can burn a lot of people. I have many colleagues who perhaps have been a little too vocal about these sort of issues and have found themselves on the outskirts of the scene in the long run, and have advised me to say, look, keep your mouth shut, just keep your head down. There is some wisdom to that. So you have to feel this out for yourselves. And for yourself. I guess it's about how comfortable or confident you feel moving into future opportunities or possibilities, in letting your professionalism speak for itself, letting your own music speak for itself. And
it would also depend on how well supported you would be by others in the group. Like if you're not very well known, so it's really this kind of situation and you don't have the support of the people around you, it would seem like a bad time to put.
Yeah, I was going to say that's more of what I have experience with. And I think my policy is kill them with kindness. Yeah. Do not engage or do not go down to the level. And I don't even say, like, if someone is being hard on you because you're the new person, which I think is pretty common, just keep letting it wash off like water off a duck's back, and you just keep nailing your entrance, playing in tune, think about your sound, match that person even harder, like don't let it shake you. Stay focused on what you're doing, because I feel like they're just mind games. I mean, that's some of my experience. And I think it may come from a place of like, this new person, I'm worried that they might encroach upon my space, my work. And if you can put a person at ease by just continuing to be cool, continue to be easygoing, I think that's the best way to go, because you don't want to take something else away from somebody. You just want to be part of it. And so I think that's the best advice I can give on the topic is just keep being kind, keep being understanding. Usually I think when negative behavior comes your way, if you think about why that person might be acting that way, you can make sense out of it and have compassion instead of anger or be feeling threatened.
Like it.
Yeah.
So this was another one that came in before the class, is how do you monetize your chamber music projects? And I could also say your solo projects.
Well, the only ones that I have successfully monetized are like my own personal projects that I've gotten to do the programming I wanted and hire the musicians that I wanted, or things that were under the umbrella of LA Chamber Orchestra. So they were either fundraising projects or for a specific concert series where I got to be a leader on a program, and that's really cool. But the individual like commissions and stuff for my chamber group, we've always had to kind of try to book performances to help the composers get, you know, more notoriety for their work. And, you know, that's that playing for exposure thing. But we weren't really making a lot of money either. We were all kind of trying to team up and do something cool together. That's one way I've come up with new projects.
How did you book things? How did you go about that?
Does anybody else want to answer? Because I'm
the
still
question?
figuring it out.
You're doing great.
I'm asking this because, like, even just knowing how do you get your group hired to play a concert somewhere, how does that work? How do you
Event coordinators. Are we talking about like just working to make some shekels? Or are we talking about like highbrow chamber music?
It doesn't matter. But let's say your trio, your group, how did you put on concerts to raise awareness for the composers for the pieces that they wrote? How did you get somebody to let you play a concert?
We were either collaborating with another group. We were agreeing to play a bunch of music by new composers who had put together a concert, and we wanted to, you know, contribute our services. There wasn't a lot of like play for enormous pay. It was always a collaborative experience, and I have not found chamber music to be a tremendous money maker, but it is immensely musically satisfying, which I think is more valuable maybe than some people realize.
How about your quartet, Bryan? Your string quartet?
Yeah, well, I think this can kind of go back to the social media question earlier. You know, how important is social media as an artist? And when it comes time for that you know, Indiegogo link, when it comes time for a Kickstarter project, you want to have had a pretty strong base intact. You know, as an artist manager myself, you end up realizing the importance of those things. So it's hard to raise money for an audience that you haven't curated or you haven't built or you haven't sort of cared for or paid attention to, and suddenly you're looking to get a project off of the ground, and you have then you're grant writing, you know, then you're looking for, you know, alternative sources of sponsorship or income. So I guess it's, for me, it sort of comes back to that. You know, I have sort of a different angle of chamber music, and in that, you know, I was very fortunate to have management for the chamber ensembles I played with. So we sort of had a built-in machine actively, you know, sort of working with us and for us to get booked. So I feel like I sort of missed out on that grind as a chamber musician necessarily, but I see the groups that are thriving right now are doing a lot. They're doing a little of a lot of things. They're doing a little of social media engagement. They're doing maybe a little more social activism. They're creating content that is engaging and fun and lighthearted, but they're creating content and they're putting themselves out there, and that's how you attract people to. I mean, I know TikTok is, you know, here we go. I don't know how your TikTok accounts are doing. Mine's horrible, but this is the, you know, we have to keep up with the kids, and you know, it's funny, you know, I don't know, everything shifts from, you know, Facebook to Instagram, now it's TikTok, and I don't know what's happening with Twitter these days, but
So I was waiting for this answer, but I think there's a perception of people who don't know how this stuff works that master classes and recitals at schools and recitals at music series, that they happen because somebody calls and asks you. And that's not usually how it works. It's usually the other way around. That if you want to give a master class, you go and you ask people, hey, can I give a master class at your school? And if you want to give a recital somewhere, then you call these people, the places that have chamber music series and concert series, and you pitch them your group or your recitals. It's like it goes the other direction. A lot of us don't. A lot of young people just building into it, they think that they have to do stuff and then the phone is going to ring, and it's really the other way around. You've got to sell yourself, right? Like that you've got a machine for your chamber group that's doing that work. That's how that goes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, oftentimes as artists, we have to sell, we have to pitch. You have to be the one with the creative force. Even when it comes to a record label, when you're signed to a record label, you want to pitch an idea for the new album. You have to kind of market the whole thing and build up yourself with inside out. You can't. It's gone are the days of sort of just sitting back and letting the stuff come to you. It's about self-generating, these things, these ideas.
And in the brass world, we'll see like the biggest stars will maybe get
like I have to recommend this book.
Oh, good.
Can to everybody who's still in school, get this and read it.
I'm on her email list and I get her weekly emails.
Yes, there were a bunch of helpful things in here that I got this in like the first year or two after I graduated, and it was really helpful. Like I have tabs and underlines and everything in here. So Beyond Talent, Creating a Successful Career in Music. I'll put it in the chat, by Angela Miles Beeching.
She's on faculty at New England Conservatory.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great starting point if you have no idea where to start.
And even just signing up for her email list, like the stuff she sends every week, it's really helpful information. I got on her radar, or she became on my radar. That's how you say it. And, like a year ago. Here's another one. In fact, since I just said a year ago, how have all of you been keeping yourselves busy during the pandemic? Feels like a question that has to be asked.
It does. I had major oral surgery and I'm only halfway through it, so I had to also relearn how to play again. That was super fun. But this is something I had been putting off for years, from medical treatment. I use that term very loosely, but I was playing on teeth that were moving, and so as soon as my dentist came back in, after everything was shut down, I called her and I was like, "Are you back yet? Because I'm having issues." So it was a good time to do that,
Bryan, do you want to say?
I feel fortunate playing with New Jersey Symphony. We've had a lot of at-home concerts, a lot of Brady Bunch recordings, as we've all sort of done.
Yeah.
Now we've been able to do person work, as early as October of last year. So we've been playing symphonies to an empty hall. They're on YouTube, concert recordings. New York is a great place to be now because, things are starting to open up. I've been fortunate to play at the Javits Center for people who are getting their vaccinations, waiting in line, and we're chamber ensembles, every day from 11 to 1 p.m. Not that I'm playing every day, but musicians in the city, our colleagues, are able to have a little bit of work here, and it's been a beautiful experience to share that with New Yorkers. My daughter came up and improvised with me on the piano. We played some duets together, and it was my son's first public performance in the Javits Center, for hundreds of people. So we're trying to think out of the box here in New York City. I mean, and it seems to be working. So little by little.
Mine is much more domestic. I feel like I want to share this just because I want everyone to know it's okay to sometimes have to step back. I think I was really grateful to Kiku for sharing that. She stepped away from her horn for a number of years because it just didn't feel like the right time. I it was very much planned, but I found out that I was pregnant 2 weeks before the virus became a pandemic. And so I didn't know what was coming. And so my pandemic project was staying home and taking care of my 2-year-old little boy while growing another human. And that was tremendously hard without any help or outside, support. And my husband was still working full time. He's a software engineer for Netflix. And so he was working his 8, 9, 10-hour days, and I was childcare and I was pregnant. And then when it came time to give birth, I went by myself to the hospital. Wow. And I gave birth with a doula so that my husband could stay home with our toddler. And so, life throws stuff at you. And honestly, I feel like freelancing and having to hustle and be so disciplined and work so hard all my life up to this point sort of prepared me for how tough this year has been. Yes. And when my husband went back to work after he had paternity leave, and then I had 2 by myself and one so tiny, like, oh my God, this has been so hard. And just having the grit. Oh my God, there's another book everyone should read, Grit, by Angela Duckworth. So good, so true. You just keep going, don't give up. That's success is just getting up one more time than you fell. It's not never falling. And I think that's important for people to hear, because I didn't win that many auditions. I got out in a lot of auditions, but you only need a few to go well in order for things to happen. So I don't talk about all the stuff that went wrong, but we could wallpaper the bathroom with my rejection letters, don't give up.
So we had a question come that I guess I missed it. And so I'm going to bring it up we're at the very end. What advice would you have to who needs to repair a bad reputation and burnt bridges? What do you do when you've made the mistakes and you're still young and you have a whole career ahead of you and you got to fix it?
Stop messing up. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
You can only go forward.
I think confession would be excellent. I've actually worked with a lot of people that have messed up, and they'll reach out and they'll try to do that whole networking thing, and I'm thinking I can't recommend this person because they have been screwing up. And most of them do not say, by the way, I know I messed up. I really know that I have been screwing up, and I'm getting it together, and I'm working on myself, and I would be so grateful for another chance. But musicians, we all have our egos, and we're all very fragile in the end, because we, what we're doing is we're putting ourselves out there every minute of every day. And so, I think, and as you get older, it's so much easier. I'm the first one with my hand up. That was me. I messed up. That was me. So no one ever has to tell me, hey, you screwed up. I'm like, no, I already know. I got that. It's not going to happen again. But I've experienced it a lot more with much younger players. And so, if you're messing up, call those people that you messed up with and say, you know what? I'm so sorry that I screwed it up for everybody. Confession is so powerful, and not enough people do it.
Yeah.
I'll dovetail that as well. And I think actions are, not to discount that advice. It's excellent advice, but actions will speak louder than words. I think that's a great step to take. But how people view you and see your patterns, we all have patterns. And when those patterns change, it's noticeable. You know, I found myself getting a little too comfortable with my arrival times at on some gigs, on some Broadway shows, and I changed my pattern. I changed my behavior very quickly because you don't want that to have to follow you around. It's not something that's that you need.
Sure. And if you get feedback, negative feedback or constructive feedback, I think also the way that you receive it is really important. So if someone tells you you're screwing up, just fix it and don't be precious about it. Just fix it. Don't be awkward. Just be like, okay, got it. Yes, I will do that.
That and
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, no, I would say also, you know, you can't sort of conversely to be the type of colleague that can have the conversation with somebody else, and it doesn't have to be a best friend, but to be comfortable enough and be like, hey man, or like I'm really happy, you know, we're on this gig together, or what have you. Just so you know, like this is the lay of the land. I really recommend maybe you want to try this or go this angle. Just a word of advice. I think you'll do very well with this. I think being that type of colleague also goes a long way too, because when we're supporting each other, we're looking out for each other, and then people are like, that's the kind of person I want to surround myself with.
Yeah. And the wording is so important when there's like intonation problems. Don't say you're flat. That feels so bad. Just even saying it. Oh God. No, just say I'm not quite catching you on this. Can we try this together at the break? That's all you have to say. And then you try it and you're working with another competent musician. They're going to figure it out. They'll hear it maybe in a different context, and then it gets better.
You're really convincing me to get out to LA now. This is not the New York way.
Oh, really? Oh gosh, I feel like it worked in New York. That was why I never wanted to pointedly attack somebody, and make them feel like you're doing something wrong. It's bothering me. You need to fix it. Like, that's not how you ever want to make anybody feel.
So here's the thing that maybe Bryan will agree with me on this, is that I feel like in a freelance situation, especially where it's not a set section, like nobody has ownership of any role, right? It's different when somebody is the concert master and like they always are, like in New Jersey Symphony, you have a set section, that it feels like you have to really be careful if you say anything at all. Like even when I'm playing principal, or when I'm a guest principal in an orchestra where I am not a member, I maybe will say nothing, or I will say,
I would agree with that.
It's so egregious that I feel like I have to say something, and then I'll be like, it will say, I don't think that we are right here, or we are not in tune, or could you stand for me? Going off of but really you have to be, even if you are playing principal, if it is not your ensemble, you really need to be careful what you say to other people.
Proceed with caution.
You pretty much say something. Last question somebody had, so I want to make sure that I ask it, because one of our attendees asked this live, is so they asked, how can you make it known you're actually interested and want to be contacted again if you have to say no because of school? I'm going to turn this into, how do you say no for a gig without closing the door for them to call you again, to try you again?
That's pretty easy, I think.
Yeah, but what is your advice?
I mean, honestly, like, there are different reasons to turn down a gig. You might have an actual conflict. You might not feel right for the gig. Or you might just not want to do it for any reason, for, it's too far, or you just don't like the music, or you don't like half the band. I don't know. There are so many different reasons. But I generally will not specify. I mean, if it's someone that I know really well, I could say, it's a little far for that kind of bread, so I don't know. Let me, but please call me for the next one, or whatever it is. Or I have to get up really early the next day, and rolling in at 2 a.m. and then getting up at 6 is not going to work out. Honestly, just politely decline and say, I hope something else comes up really soon where we can work together.
I think a phrase I use a lot is, "I'm so sorry, I'm already booked." I am. I don't you feel the need to elaborate with exactly what.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you're not booked,
No,
you
but I
know,
mean, well, I guess what I'm saying is that even if it's not a gig, like if it's if it's a doctor's appointment or if it's
Right.
something like really essential that I can't move or change, it's okay to be booked with your personal life.
That's
What
true,
I'm
yeah.
saying. And you
Okay.
don't have to explain necessarily. Say you're sorry that you're missing out and you really want to work for them again. And thank you so much for the opportunity for the call. And I always offer, if you need to names, please ask me. I'm happy to provide them.
Mhm.
Don't offer with a unsolicited.
Right. That's actually something that I sometimes do, depending on the person that's calling me. 'Cause
Well,
some
again, yeah. If
people-
you have a
Woo!
relationship, yeah.
Well, some people are so particular,
Yeah.
and I don't want to send somebody who I think is fabulous, who they're like, oh my God, you know. It's like, no, don't put that on me. I was trying to do you a favor. So I'm a little bit careful with that if I'm not positive. Because I mean, the gigs that I get are often so multifaceted. You know, I might not know how well somebody can sing backup. I don't know. I don't know how
I
well
think
they
your
dance.
your gigs are so unique. I feel like when I
are.
recommend somebody, I know kind of what's coming.
Right. Like it's like I don't know if they can. I don't know if they know all these dance moves. So
Oh my God. I can't imagine.
To stick with what Sandy said is like they don't need to know, the contractor
Yeah.
doesn't know what you're busy doing.
right.
If I'm
Well,
called,
I especially don't want to share if it's like something that someone might judge me for, but it's still really important to me.
like if somebody asked me to play in a big band and it starts at 11 p.m. For like $50, I am busy in bed sleeping. I don't need to tell you.
I'm totally booked.
I'm so sorry, I'm not available, but thank you so much for calling me. I hope we can work together another time. Like, please think of that's literally happened. And I was like, no, there's no way. I turned into a pumpkin.
But I think this question about if it's because of school, I think it's okay to say, I have school obligations for my degree. I'd really love to take this, but if I miss X, I won't graduate.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would be there. Please call me again. I would love to work for you. If that's the reason, I would say just be upfront about
That's
it.
an easy one, yeah. Because that shows being professional.
Yep. Yeah. I already have this thing that I've committed to. If you book me in the future, that you want them to know, you would say the same if another gig came up.
I was just gonna say that I'd say be upfront, but also be succinct.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be heartfelt. It doesn't have to be desperate. I would say it doesn't have to be desperate.
Mm-hmm.
Be succinct, remain professional, and be ready for the next opportunity. That's what else can we do?
Don't let them guilt you into taking it anyway.
Right.
How many times have people tried to convince me that no, I can do the gig? Like, no, I already told you I can't.
So here's another spicy question to wrap it all up. So my first gig I got was somebody had gotten a better paying gig and I was taking the first gig, right? So how do you all handle that situation where you were paid off one gig, it doesn't pay very well, and you just got a better paying gig? How do you get out of the first one? How do you go through the motions of that?
I think it depends on your relationship with the contractor for whom you are already engaged. Depending on who it is, if I feel like I can be honest and be like, oh my God, I just got offered this. What do you think I should do? Like if I'm close with someone, I would I would present the real situation. But I would say your word is your bond. And as hard as it's been sometimes to let other stuff go, like I got offered to go on a Asia tour with New York Phil, and it conflicted with, I was still on probation with LA Chamber, and I was playing Brandenburg 5. And the first rehearsal conflicted with the last concert of my LACO thing. And I had to turn down the entire tour to make sure that I would get my tenure with my orchestra that is now my main job. So I would say, a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but those are being like getting tenure LACO is a big deal. It's not like a little church gig versus playing orchestra with the New York Philharmonic. That's kind of the situation I'm talking about.
Right. You're talking about like the $50 gig.
Versus like really, really, yeah.
And that's happened to me, honestly, when, if you're booked on something, like a kind of a small gig, and it especially helps if you know that person really well that hired you, and you can say, hey, this happened, and what do you think? I really want to do the gig with you, and you know that, and we have history, but what would you do?
Yeah.
How can we work
dialogue.
this out? Yeah, how can we work this out without you being mad at me? Because if that's going to happen, then I'm turning that down.
The commonality is both of you are saying if you really know the person. So
yes.
That feeling is that if I don't know them, I'm going to stick with the first one so that I don't burn any bridges. What do you think about that, Bryan?
Yeah, well, I
unless
think,
you're okay with burning the bridge.
Right. Oh, that's a possibility too. I mean, who is the group and who is the person, and how do you feel about never working with them again? It's a possibility.
Is the new opportunity worth the chance that you might lose the relationship? Right. Sometimes you have to weigh that.
Right. I mean, if you're doing like, playing at someone's wedding, and then someone calls you to be on TV, like Saturday Night Live, okay. What do you do? And most people will understand if that second gig is really big. Most people are going to say, oh my God, I wish they called me too. Of course you have to do this, and I'll see you next time.
I would say that for me, it should be less about like the earning potential of the other thing, and more about if it's a career trajectory move. I would sort of base the decision off of that, because as freelancers, we're getting double booked, triple booked all the time, and it's often about weighing these decisions out. Well, which is the best gig? Well, that's relative. Something can be the best gig because it's building a relationship with the person who's hiring you. Something can be the best gig because it's an opportunity for you to meet new people outside of your own circle. And it could be the worst paying job, but with the best people to meet.
Yes, I take those all the time.
Yeah.
Those are my favorites.
And those are the most important in the long run.
Yes.
You learn that over the years.
Or and that you get to play Star Wars, which has been your lifelong dream.
Yeah. Too often I've had, we get approached, because on Broadway, we hire our own subs for the show. So we kind of in turn are our own contractors in sort. And it becomes really tricky when, you've hired out a slew of dates, and, you get it a few times. People are like, hey, like this thing came up, like, I'm like, yeah, okay, no problem. It has been a problem for many people, and if that happens too often, or as a subcontractor or a contractor, you begin to think, oh well, I guess it would be more worthwhile to hire somebody who's kind of really needing this work,
more reliable.
And in that sense, you're having to judge it and be like, oh well, I guess they don't need it. You're making a judgment call, and it's like, oh, they don't need it. Maybe they don't appreciate it.
Right.
Well, guys, speaking of being needed and appreciated, I am needed upstairs, so I gotta go. But thank you so much for having me, Nikki. I really love talking to all of you. This was very cool.
Thank you.
Super fun.
Thanks, Sandy. Me too.
If anybody has any questions for me specifically that I didn't have a chance to answer, I'm happy to get emails through my website or give them to Nikki and I will respond. But I'm so sorry, I have to go. All right. Take care, you guys. Bye.
Bye.
I'm feeling this really strong thread throughout the last, like, now we're almost 2 hours, but there's so much importance of our ability to deal with people, right?
Mhm.
How do we cultivate these personal relationships? And like Bryan, what you were talking about, you've given somebody 2 weeks of dates, and then they get into a habit of every time you give them dates, there's 1 or 2 that they back out on, and then you have to find somebody else, and it becomes, that your people don't realize what they're doing, how they're harming their relationship, or how their actions are being perceived by the other person. They don't have that kind of understanding of the way that other people are going to read them. It's so much more than our ability to play our instruments.
Yes.
Yeah, it's about reading the room. It's about taking one for the team every now and again. We can't do everything. We can't do all the gigs. We can't do all the best gigs. But yeah, how to remind ourselves, like, what's truly important. What are you actually getting out of this? Yeah, who's to say? I mean, we have to make judgment calls along the way. You have to use our instincts. Some people are better at using their instincts, than others, but you learn, and hopefully you learn quickly, and it doesn't take you too long to, to read that room and to pick up on those cues.
Do either of you have any last remarks for the people here right now, and people who will watch it on YouTube later?
I mean, there's been so much great content in this discussion, and I'm learning. I never stop learning, because how can you, right?
Yeah.
It's really important to think about why you do this, and sometimes I'll think, well, when I was little, what did I want from music? And it wasn't specifically to do what I'm doing. It wasn't like, oh, I really want to be on TV, and that was the furthest thing from my mind. And it really was, I like playing music because it makes people happy. And so, if you every once in a while reintroduce that in your head. If you're miserable at a gig, if you're like, oh my God, the sound check is taking 7 hours and I have no idea what's going on, remember why you did it. It wasn't to make it to dinner on time or something, like, oh, but we're not gonna have time to eat. It's like, right, pack a protein bar for these moments, and you sit at that sound check, whatever needs to be done, and you can reassess later on whether or not it's worth it to do it again. But when you're there, and you're there to do a job. I mean, I've done jobs like where I've flown to Greece, and it's supposed to be an outdoor concert, and there's a big rainstorm, and they're like, oh my God, you guys will get electrocuted if you go on the stage, so they have to rebuild another stage. And the show's supposed to start at 9. It starts at 2 in the morning, and we're just stuck there. And they're coming around apologizing, and I look at them, I say, but I'm here to do a gig, so don't worry about it. But do you have more coffee? Am I gonna make my flight home? Because it's cool. But I flew there to play music and to make people happy. So I did it.
Well, I think over this pandemic, I think one of the greatest lessons that I've learned is what is truly important to you as a human being, not even as a musician, and being all the more grateful for the opportunities that I have going forward, and that I have had, or could have, and will have. It's about centering yourself. For me, it's about realigning and reaffirming what is really important to you moving forward. that's probably the last thing I think we could say. I mean, we're all anxious to get back to work. We're anxious to get on top of those new projects that we set out to do. It's inspiring to see how gritty our community is, you know, our people, and it's also been heartbreaking to see so many fall by the wayside, and it's going to be hard for a lot of people. It's not going to be easy to come back, but we have to think outside of the box now. Everything is different.
Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the record button now. Bye, everybody.
Bye.